Good morning, guys. Here we are with our last few sections of Stargirl. So, chapter 27, page 145. And our best wishes go with you, Susan Caraway, the PA announcement echoed. The PA is like the announcements, like the speaker in the classroom. Echoed through the school lobby, and we were off to Phoenix. The driver was Mr. McShane, Micah High's faculty representative to the state contest. Susan and I sat in the back. Susan's parents were driving their own car and would meet us in Phoenix. As we pulled out of the parking lot, she wagged a finger in my face. "Don't get a big head, mister. I was allowed to invite 2 friends along. You weren't the only one I asked." "So who was the other?" I said. "Dory." "Well then, I think I'll go for the big head. Dory isn't another guy." She grinned. "No, she's not one of those." Suddenly she unbuckled her seatbelt. We each had a back window. "Mr. McShane," she announced, "I'm moving over so I can sit close to Leo. He's so cute I can't help myself." In the rearview mirror, the teacher's eyes crinkled. "Whatever you like, Susan, it's your day." She slid over and fastened herself into the middle belt. She jabbed me. "Hear that? It's my day. I get whatever I want." "So," I said, "what happened when you asked Dory Dilson?" "Oh, she said no. She's mad at me." I could tell. Ever since I became Susan, she thinks I betrayed myself. She just doesn't understand how important it is to be popular. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I was feeling a little uneasy. Fortunately, wondering what to say wasn't much of a problem for me during the 2-hour ride, because Susan chattered away like the old Stargirl the whole time. "But I know Dory," she said, "and I'll tell you one thing." "What's that?" "She'll be in the front of my mob cheering for me when we get back tomorrow." I later found out that after we left the school, the principal had spoken again on the PA. He announced our expected time of arrival on Saturday and suggested that everyone be on hand to meet us, win or lose. Losing, as it turned out, never occurred to the contestant herself. "Would you do a favor for me?" she asked. I told her sure. "The big silver plate that goes to the winner. I'm such a klutz with dishes at home. Would you hold on for me when the crowd rushes us? I'm afraid I'll drop it." I stared at her. "What crowd? What rush?" "In the school parking lot when we get back tomorrow. There's always a crowd waiting for the returning hero. Remember the film at school, My Vision?" She cocked her head and peered into my eyes. She rapped my forehead with her knuckle. "Hello in there. Anybody home?" "Oh," I said, "that crowd." She nodded. "Exactly, of course. We'll be safe as long as we're in the car, but once we get out, who knows what will happen? Crowds can get pretty wild. Right, Mr. McShane?" The teacher nodded. "So I hear." She spoke to me as if instructing a first grader. "Leo, this has never happened in Micah before. Having a winner of the Arizona State Oratorical Contest. One of their very own. When they hear about it, they're gonna go bananas. And when they get a gander at me and that trophy," she rolled her eyes and whistled, "I just hope they don't get out of hand. The police will keep them in line," I said. "Maybe they'll call out the National Guard, just like the military." She stared wide-eyed. "You think?" She didn't realize I was kidding. "Well," she said, "I'm not really afraid for myself. I won't mind a little jostling, a little moving around." "Do you think they'll jostle, Mr. McShane?" In the mirror, his eyes shifted to us. "Never can tell." "And if they want to carry me around on their shoulders, that's okay too. But they better not," she poked me with her finger, "better not mess with my trophy. That's why you," another poke, "are going to hold it tight." I wished Mr. McShane would say something. "Susan," I said, "did you ever hear of counting your chickens?" "Before they hatch, you mean?" It's a phrase that people say a lot. It's like, don't count your chickens before they hatch, right? Don't expect that something's going to happen before it happens, basically. "Before they hatch, you mean?" "Exactly. I hear you're not supposed to." "Exactly." I nodded thoughtfully. She nodded thoughtfully. Never made much sense to me. I mean, page 148. If you know they're going to hatch, why not count them? Because you can't know, I said. There are no guarantees. I hate to break this to you, but you're not the only person in the contest. Somebody else could win. You could lose. It's possible. She thought about that for a moment, then shook her head. Nope, not possible. So, she threw up her arms and smiled hugely. Why wait to feel great? Celebrate now. That's my motto. She nuzzled into me, like she hugged and sat next to him. What's yours, big boy? Don't count your chickens, I said. She shuddered mockingly. Ooh, you're such a poop, Leo. What's your motto, Mr. McShane? Drive carefully, he said. You may have a winner in the car. That set her off howling. Mr. McShane, I said, you're not helping. Sorry, he lied. I just looked at her. You're going to be in a state contest, I said. Aren't you just a little bit nervous? The smile vanished. Yes, I am. I'm a lot nervous. I just hope things don't get out of hand when we get back to the school. I've never been adored by mobs of people before. I'm not sure how I'm going to react. I hope I don't get a big head. Do you think I'm going to get a big head, Mr. McShane? I raised my hand. I can answer that. I think your head is just fine, said the teacher. She jabbed me with her elbow. Hear that, Mr. Know-it-all? She gave me her smug face, which promptly disappeared as she thrust her arms up and yelled, They're going to love me! Mr. McShane wagged his head and chuckled. Silently, I gave up. She pointed out the window. Look, even the desert is celebrating. It seemed to be true. The normally dull cacti and shrub were splashed with April colors, as if the painter had passed over the landscapes with a brush, dabbing yellow here, red there. Susan strained against her seatbelt. Mr. McShane, can we stop here just for a minute, please? When the teacher hesitated, she added, You said it's my day. I get whatever I want. The car coasted to a stop along the gravelly roadside. In a moment, she was out the door and bounding across the desert, running across the desert. She skipped and whirled and cartwheeled among the prickly natives. She bowed to a yucca. These are all plants, by the way. Waltzed with a saguaro. She plucked a red blossom from a barrel cactus and fixed it to her hair. She practiced her smile and her nod and her wave, her nod and her wave, one hand, two hand, to the adoring mob and their hero's welcome. She snapped a needle from the cactus, and with a slapstick pantomime of a circus clown, right, she's pretending, pantomime means to, pretend act, like a circus clown, pretended to pick her teeth with it. Mr. McShane and I were leaning on the car, laughing, when suddenly she stopped, cocked her head, and stared off in another direction. She stayed like that, stone still, for a good 2 minutes, page 150, then abruptly turned and came back to the car. Her face was thoughtful. Mr. McShane, she said, and as the teacher drove off, do you know any extinct birds? Passenger pigeon, he said. That's probably the best known. They say there used to be so many of them they would darken the sky when they flew over. And the moa. The moa? It's a huge bird. Like a condor, I said. And you should look these up. They're really pretty birds. A condor they're beautiful giant birds. A condor wouldn't come up to its knee. Make it an ostrich look small. 12, 13 feet tall, maybe. The biggest bird ever. Couldn't fly. Lived in New Zealand. Died out hundreds of years ago. Killed off by people. Half their size, said Susan. Mr. McShane nodded. I wrote a report about moas in grade school. I thought they were the neatest thing. Susan's eyes were glistening. Did moas have a voice? The teacher thought about it. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. Susan looked out the window at the passing desert. I heard a mockingbird back there, and it made me think of something Archie said. Mr. Brubaker, said Mr. McShane. Yes, he said he believes mockingbirds may do more than imitate other living birds. He thinks they may also imitate the sounds of birds that are no longer around. He thinks the sounds of extinct birds are passed down the years from mockingbird to mockingbird. If you don't know what a mockingbird is, It's a bird that whenever it hears something, it copies it, right? It mocks it. So like if somebody says, stop mocking me, right? Stop like making fun of me or copying me. So it comes from the mockingbird, because when they hear a bird, they repeat it. So they're saying that like mockingbirds don't just repeat living birds, but all the birds from the history. It's pretty interesting. All right, top of 151. Interesting thought, said Mr. McShane. He says, when a mockingbird sings, for all we know, it's pitching fossils into the air. He says, who knows what songs of ancient creatures we may be hearing out there? The words of Archie Brubaker settled over the silence in the car. As if reading my thoughts, Mr. McShane turned off the air conditioner and powered down the windows. Hair blew in a faint and smoky scent of mesquite, the smell of the desert. After a while, I felt the touch of Susan's hand. Her fingers wove through mine. Mr. McShane, she cooed. We're holding hands in the back seat. Uh-oh, he said. Hormonal teenagers. Don't you think he's cute, Mr. McShane? I never really thought about it, said the teacher. Well, look, she said, and grabbed my face in her hand and pulled it forward. The teacher's eyes considered me briefly in the mirror. You're right, he's adorable. Susan released my blushing face. Told you, don't you love him? I wouldn't go that far. A minute later, Mr. McShane. Mr. McShane! Now I feel something in my ear. I'm putting my fingers in his ear. The sort of silliness went on until we rounded the mesa and saw the brown mist in the horizon that announced our approach to the city of Phoenix. Chapter 28. Her parents met us in the lobby of the hotel where Susan, Mr. McShane, and I each had a room for the night. After we checked in, the 5 of us ate a buffet lunch in the hotel restaurant. Then we watched Susan board the bus that would take her and the 18 other contestants to Phoenix West High School. There were 38 contestants. 19 had already given their speeches that morning. By the end of the afternoon, 10 finalists would be chosen, and the finals would take place that evening. To be honest, none of us was surprised that Susan made the cut. She was incredibly good. The surprise was this. Her speech was new. It was not the one she had given at Micah High. It was not the one she had been practicing for weeks in front of me and Peter Stinkowitz, hard name, and assorted saguaros. It was not the one I had heard just the day before, but it was wonderful. There were some elements of the old speech in it, and much that was as new as that morning. Like a butterfly, her words fluttered from image to image. She swung from the distant past, Barney, Archie's Paleocene rodent skull, and to the present, Cinnamon, and to the distant future, the death of the sun. From the most ordinary here, like the old man nodding off on the bench at Tudor Village, to the most extraordinary there, a newly discovered galaxy 90% to the end of the universe. She touched on silver lunch trucks and designer labels in enchanted places, and when she said her best friend gave her pet rat a ride on his shoulder, tears came to my eyes. It was a jumble, it was a mismatch, and somehow she pulled it all together. Somehow she threaded every different thing through the voice of a solitary mockingbird singing in the desert. She called her speech, I Might Have Heard a Moa. The auditorium was half full, mostly with small groups of students and parents from the competing schools. After a contestant finished, his or her supporters whistled and whooped as if their doing so would influence the judges. The rest was polite applause. When Susan finished, the 4 of us managed a modest cheer, but that was about it. No whistles, no whoops. And I think we are made of more timid stuff than the speechmaker herself. Back at the hotel, Mr. McShane and I mobbed her, if 2 can be a mob. Her parents were more reserved. They were full of smiles and well-dones, but they seemed no more surprised at her success than Susan did. When the adults went off to the gift shop, I had her to myself, and I said, Where did that come from? She grinned. Did you like it? Sure, but it's not what I've been hearing for the last month. What were you doing? Practicing a secret speech on the side? The grin got wider. Nope, that was the first time I heard it too. I stared at her, Slowly her words sank in. Let me get this straight, page 154. You're saying you just made it up this morning? I'm saying I didn't even make it up. It was just there. All I did was open my mouth and let it out. She held both hands out to me and snapped her fingers. Presto. I gaped at her. What are you going to say tonight? She threw out her arms. Who knows? The 5 of us ate an early dinner in the hotel restaurant. Afterward, we waited in the lobby a while Susan changed clothes. She stepped out of the elevator wearing a peach-colored pantsuit, which means her top and bottom were the same color. She slinked across the lobby, modeling for us, and sat on her mother's lap and said, My personal seamstress made it for me. We applauded lightly and sent her off on the bus. The general public was invited to the evening show, and the auditorium was packed. People stood in back, down front. A high school orchestra played rousing music by John Philip Sousa, who's a very famous music writer. The 10 contestants sat on stage. 7 were boys, and all of the contestants appeared to be grim and nervous, stiff as mannequins, except for Susan, who was bending the ear of the boy sitting next to her. He nodded occasionally, but kept his eyes and spine at attention, and obviously wished that she would shut up. Susan's parents chuckled knowingly at her behavior, while I tried to disguise a stab of jealousy. One by one, the contestants took the long walk to the center stage to give their speeches. The applause was equally hearty for all. A grade school girl in a frilly white dress handed each contestant a bouquet of roses, yellow for the girls and red for the boys. While the girls cradled their roses, the boys looked at them as if they were handed grenades, like something that would explode. Susan was next to last to speak. When her name was called, she bounced up from her chair and practically ran to the microphone. She did a sprightly pirouette, which is a turn, a curtsy, and waved her hand in a window washer motion and said, Hi! Accustomed to seeing stiff, mortified contestants, the audience responded with uncertain titters, right? They were confused because they were used to all these boring kids giving speeches. They didn't know what to make of this unconventional teenager any more than we had on the first day of school. Several bold souls said hi and waved back. She did not begin, at least not in the usual sense. There was no ringing preamble. She merely stood there comfortably chatting away as if she were on a rocking chair in her front porch. Murmur drifted toward the ceiling, and people were waiting for her to get started. The murmur subsided, and occurred to them that this was it, and they were missing it. The quiet that fell over the auditorium was absolute, right? It was silent. I was more tuned into the audience than to the speaker, and if for the last 5 minutes of her talk anyone was breathing, I could not detect it. When she finished, with barely a whisper, "Can you hear it?" and leaned with her cupped hand to her ear, 1,500 people seemed to inch forward, straining to hear. There were 10 seconds of purest stillness. Then she turned abruptly and went back to her chair. There was no reaction. What's going on? I wondered. She sat forward in her chair, her hands folded primly in her lap, and then it came, suddenly, explosively, as if everyone had awakened at once. We were all on our feet, clapping and shouting and whistling. I found myself sobbing, crying. The cheering was as wild as that of a crowd at a championship basketball game. All right, guys, we're going to pause there. Make sure you're doing your summaries. Go check Teams because you have questions on Teams about each of these chapter chunks. All right, guys, thanks. Bye.